As the reality of the ultimate sacrifice hits so close to home.
At our house, he is the villain.
Sometimes you just gotta use the right thing.
Hey everybody, welcome to That Voiceover Podcast, the show for and about the voiceover profession. I'm Stephen Cox. My guests this week are two of the heavy hitters in the world of voiceover instruction, James Alburger and Penny Abshire. And I usually sit down to tape one of these podcasts with the expectation that we'll go up 20 minutes or so. But James and Penny had so much great information that we talked for over an hour and a half, which is an actual record for this show. So what I've done is I've edited it down to two segments, the first of which you will hear now, and then we will broadcast the second half of the show next week. So enjoy. James Alburger and Penny Abshire, thank you for coming on That Voiceover Podcast.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you for inviting us.
Now, James, let's start with you. You've been in the business for over 35 years as an actor, producer, director, engineer. You're an Emmy Award-winning sound designer and a teacher. Tell us about how you got started.
It's funny. Every time somebody says that, Penny just looks at me and says, "Oh, no, not again."
It's that story
again. He doesn't know how to tell a short story.
Okay, well, we've got time.
Okay. Well, I'll try and keep it brief. But basically, I got into performing when I was about 12 because I discovered magic, and early on discovered that I didn't like talking in front of an audience. I was kind of geeky and uncomfortable doing my magic shows with talking. And this is in the early 60s when Ed Sullivan was on TV.
Right.
And he had a magician on every single week, and they always worked to music. So with that, I taught myself how to edit music through a process of working with my dad's old tape recorder. Anyhow, the whole story is in the biography or in the autobiography part of my book in the intro. Right, explain all that.
And we should mention that the book is The Art of Voice Acting, and
yes.
I will definitely be providing a link for that on the site, along with your site, voiceacting.com.
Perfect, thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's, by the way, the book's now in the 4th edition, and it's used by a dozen universities as a major textbook. And
congrats, that's great.
Thanks. Yeah, and it's become, by the professionals in voiceover, it's really become recognized as the go-to book on the craft and business of voiceover.
Yeah, which is great. Yeah, I know that it's a top seller on Amazon and other places as well. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, my publisher likes that a lot.
I'm sure they do.
But anyhow, getting back to the story, the fact that I taught myself to edit music eventually got me into radio, which eventually got me into recording studios. And when I got out of recording studios, that got me into television, where I was an audio supervisor, production engineer, a television director. I did 25 newscasts a week.
Wow.
And I did all the audio production and sound design for the stations, all the news promos and other in-house audio projects, I did the audio side of the projects. So I really gained a very working understanding of what works with video and sound and picture and how to deliver a message. And I was working with voice talent on a daily basis from the engineering and producing side. So I knew how to get the talent to get the delivery that I needed to convey the message. And then when I left television in 1998, that just was a natural move for me to move into the voiceover side and the coaching and the teaching, because I'd been doing that for such a long time anyhow.
And you felt like you had been working with actors long enough that you were confident, sort of, after giving all the direction that you had given, taking the direction yourself and saying, hey, I think I can do this.
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All that time when I was working in television, I was directing and teaching the voice talent that was coming into our station how to deliver their lines.
And so it probably got very frustrating after a while, and it's like, look, stand aside, I'm going to do it myself.
I felt like that a few times, yeah.
I'm sure you did.
Unfortunately, most of the time I couldn't do that. But
well, I want to talk at length with both of you about your methods and ideas and all of the things that you have published and talked about on the world of voiceover. But Penny, I want to get you to weigh in on your own story, because you have an interesting story of how you got started in voiceover. You say you started doing theater. You actually spent a number of years in estate law. You worked with John Gray, the Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus author. So tell your story. How did all that add up to voiceover?
Well, mine's a much shorter story. You will find. I've actually discovered voiceover. As you said, I had a background in doing theater, and I had done a lot of teaching and a lot of performing all my life. But I was kind of at a point where I was doing the responsible thing by working as a paralegal. I was making a good living, and I had a good retirement. And at the time, I was 47 years old, and I had kind of come to the conclusion that that's just what I was going to do until I retired, and it'd be safe. But because I'm a creative, I was just dying a slow death working in estate law.
Right.
It paid me well. I was very good at it. It was a very good career. However, it wasn't for me. And I always like to make sure that people know that I'm not trying to diss that kind of a career. It just wasn't for me. Creatives need to create. And when you stick us in a cubicle and have us do the same thing over and over and over and over,
we die a slow death.
Yeah, it's a slow death. So, but I'd kind of resigned myself to that fact. Well, a friend of mine who actually I taught with for the Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus workshops, he said, well, let's go take this 3-hour class by this Alburger guy that says something about how to make money in voiceovers. It was taught by the Learning Annex. And I said, I don't want to go. He said, oh, come on, it won't hurt. Let's just go find out what it's all about. I said, I don't want to go. So he literally dragged me to this 3-hour workshop, took the class from Jim, and Jim is an excellent teacher and explains things extremely well. But I had the opportunity to get on mic, be recorded. And I tell you, Stefan, when I left there, I knew.
Now, what is it about voiceover that's creatively fulfilling for you specifically?
For me, it was the ability to, number one, act, which has been my love ever since I was a small child. I love to create characters, pretend to be somebody else. Those kinds of things light me up. It also gave me the ability, after I got into voiceover, to find out that I actually had a knack for copywriting as well. When I took classes from Jim, and then I took more classes and more classes and more classes, and he and I found out that we work extremely well together. I have been very blessed in that, because you don't always find people in this lifetime that you can connect with that well. Yeah,
and you've been working together for how many years now?
It's 12 years about.
Oh, wow.
Including the time I was taking classes from him. So we found out that we have a very synergistic energy to be able to create together. So when I started working with him full time and had the ability to also write, that again fulfilled that creative need that I had.
You both have done such extensive work in voiceover, like I said, on both sides of the glass, as they say. So I'd like to kind of get in now to the teaching aspect of things. You talk about yourselves not only as voiceover coaches, but also as career coaches. I'd like to start sort of with the basics. And Penny, maybe you can answer this best since you started from this place.
Right.
How do you start teaching somebody who is absolutely new to voiceover? Where do you start?
Where do you start? Well, I have a little different approach than most people, because where I start is to find out what it is they really want. I start from of an emotional place. What do you want from this? What do you want to accomplish with this? And then I go from there. I also am, if you know much about me, I'm a very encouraging, nurturing person. So I generally sit down with them and find out, what is it that you want to do? Do you want this part-time, full-time? Where are you coming from? What kind of money do you need to make? I sit down with them and really look at their goals first. Then I know how to teach them.
Okay, let's say somebody goes into one of your classes. I'm just going to give you for instance, because as voiceover people, we get approached a lot by people who are interested in what we do. And a lot of times people will come to me and say, people have said I have a good voice, or I can do a number of different characters, or any of this stuff.
Right.
It's the standard stuff that you generally hear. You take somebody from that, and then you tell them what?
Well, first of all, the first thing that I say to a new student is that I cannot make you an actor. I can make you a better actor. Because, and this is my philosophy, and that is that we are either born as actors or we're not. So I want to work with them for a while and see if they actually have that acting gene. But I'm very honest with people to tell them it has very little to do with the sound of your voice.
Right.
And everything to do with whether or not you can act. And then how well you can create different characters. One of the things that we do tell our students as we get into their training is we want to train them to be more than a one-trick pony. You need to be able to create interesting and compelling characters. That's part of what this is about. So just being able to say, well, I have this wonderful, mellifluous voice, it's not compelling unless there's acting behind it. Having a wonderful voice is terrific. That's a great place to start. But it's much like having, let's say, a Stradivarius violin in your closet. Unless you know how to play it, it's a piece of wood.
So how do you get people to know how to play their voice, as it were?
Well, that's where the training comes in.
Yeah.
And that's where it has to start with a passion from the student. They have to first have a basic understanding of what it is they're getting into. And this is something that Penny and I are adamant about, and that is making sure that our students fully realize that this is show business. And the larger part of show business is business. And if you're going to get into voiceover, it's important to realize that it's going to take some work and some effort. This is not an overnight success kind of gig by any stretch of the imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And what happens there is that, and it's a real conflict sometimes, is that people who are creatives don't like to do the paperwork. We don't. We want to create, we want to play, we want to have fun. We don't want to have to keep a database of clients and do follow-up calls and do invoices and all those things you have to do if you have a business. And I would say to you, Stefan, that when people come in and start their training, we have, I have to admit, a small percentage that actually go on to doing this as a successful business. And that's why.
Because they actually are able to master the business side of things.
Right. If you can't master the business side, you can be incredibly talented and no one will know about you.
Well, I want to talk about that a little bit more extensively, but first I want to kind of back up just a little bit and talk a little bit more about your teaching method, because I've on my way up through this career of voiceover, I've worked with a number of different coaches, and everybody seems to have a different approach as to how to get the copy to sound like conversation coming out of your mouth. And so I'm curious, what's generally your approach? Because I assume that you start with the commercial copy and kind of work from there. Is that correct?
Well, okay. Let's just take commercial as an example, because there are about 13 different genres of voiceover, and each one of them has slightly different approaches. But we'll take commercial because that's kind of the broadest. When we're working with a commercial script, the first and primary objective that we have as a voice actor is to find a way of communicating whatever that message is that's in that script. And we need to do that in an interesting and compelling manner, hopefully to motivate the listener to take some action or do something. Well, there are a number of different methodologies or schools for acting. Method acting is one of the possibilities or one of the options that's out there. There's method, there's Meisner, there's Stella Adler. There's a half dozen others, that are around, which are all professed to be the best ever acting techniques. What we do is I've been familiar with most of those, and there are some parts of all of them that I think are really good, and there are other parts that I really don't think apply to the kind of performance that we do as voice actors. So I pick and choose. I take what works, which is what we recommend to our students. If it works, use it. If it doesn't work, put it aside. It might work 5 years from now. Who knows? That's why my book's just chock full of all kinds of techniques. It's a toolbox, really. And when we're teaching our students, the process that we have created is one that we've come to refer to as the 7 core elements of a performance. And in all the years that I've been working and looking at all the other acting schools, it really comes down to really 5 key components, and then there are 2 other aspects that absolutely are essential for a good performance.
Okay.
But there are 5 key elements which are very specific processes. Once those processes are understood and internalized, then it's really easy for the actor to find an interpretation for the copy, because it just comes. You don't have to do any fancy woodshedding. You don't have to do any deep interpretation of anything. It just happens. And the 7 core elements are alphabetical, which makes it really easy to remember.
Okay.
They're A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And in the book, this is all explained in chapter 6, which is the 7 core elements of performance. And they are audience, backstory, character, desires, energy, forget who you are and focus, and gamble.
Explain the last one. I think that's the one that sounds most interesting to me. What is the gamble?
Gamble simply means, this is true of every actor. It doesn't matter what kind of a performance you're doing, whether you're doing a presentation for your corporation or your company, or you're just standing up at a meeting. There's a performance there, and every performer must be willing to take the risk of being rejected.
That's a hard one for creative people, for sure.
It's very hard. It is very hard, but it's a key component of business also, because you have to be willing to take the risk. You have to be willing to make that phone call to talk to somebody who might be a prospective client and discuss, what their needs are and how you might fit into their projects or whatever the conversation might be.
Well, and you take the risk of them rejecting you too. Yeah. And as you say, Stefan, for creatives, being rejected hurts. That's where, because we're actors, we have to put on that hat of being the person that really doesn't bother.
You do develop a thick skin after a while. And I do have to say, I think having done a little bit of on-camera acting, it's certainly easier in the voiceover world because you never actually see or watch the person listening to your read and going, no. That basically happens someplace else. So it's easier to sort of forget it once you've done the work. You can kind of say, well, okay, let's just let that go.
In some cases, yes, that's true. In other cases, that's not true. If you're working from your home studio on a producerless, directorless session where you have to do everything through your own self-direction, you end up often second-guessing yourselves.
That is true. You can very much get into your own head if you don't have an engineer or somebody coaching you nearby.
You've got to be willing to take the risk. You just have to be willing to take that step to put yourself out there and see what happens.
Let me back up again and I want to bring something up that you said before, because you went through the alphabetical steps. And then you said one of the key things which really appealed to me was forget them. And I think that's something that a lot of actors have kind of a difficult time with, is that once you have spent the time learning all of these steps, whether it's Meisner, whether it's Stella Adler, whatever it is, the hardest thing often for actors is to forget the training and really just be in the moment. How do you advise people to do that?
Well, the F step is really, it's forget who you are and focus. Mm-hmm. And this is where constant training and working at the craft really becomes important. Every actor who is going to be any sort of an effective communicator has to be able to learn how to step outside of themselves, or how to create a way that works for them to develop or to communicate the message, whether it's a scene in a play or whether it's a commercial message or telling a story for an audiobook, whatever it is. As actors, we have to learn how to become the effective storytellers and make it real. It has to be real, has to be authentic, has to be compelling and believable in order for the listener to really be able to accept it and internalize it and do something with it. So forgetting who you are is probably the single most difficult part of any acting. It's harder than taking the risk.
You have to get out of your way.
You do, and it's so easy to get in your own head, particularly when you start to learn technique. I think a lot of us find that is when we start to learn the craft of it. You second guess yourself, and oh boy, should I hit this line this way, or if I'm thinking about hitting this line this way, am I not in the moment? And it's just like you really
No, you're not.
Yeah, exactly. So you can really get into your head that way. And so, I mean, are there any sort of Zen techniques that you can offer people to sort of get out of their own way?
I don't know about Zen techniques. I know one thing. I know one thing that I have found over the years of learning my craft, and that is that when I am truly in character, I don't think about how to deliver the lines because my character knows how to deliver the lines. I guess that's about as Zen as I can get for you, because a lot of people will be scratching their head going, so how exactly do I do that? One of the things that works very well for me and has for others is creating a core group of characters.
Explain what you mean by that.
A core group of characters simply means that I have about 10 or 12 characters that represent different parts of me. I would perhaps have one that's very, very outgoing and bubbly and upbeat. I'll have one that's a woman who is in authority that I might use for a school principal or a police officer or a doctor. I would have another one who's from the South or another one who is British. I'll have a whole cast of characters so that when I get a script, I've got an audition that came in. I look at that. I don't have to think, oh my gosh, what kind of character do I want for this? All I do is take my characters out of my pocket, sit them on the table and say, okay, who's going to be the best one to audition this script? Now, there's one more step to that. I might choose one particular character. She's the energy that I want, but it's not quite the right voice. So I take her, and much like you remember the Mr. Potato Head game?
Right.
Okay. So I'm starting with a potato. Now I'm going to change so that's the core. So I might change the eyes and the lips and the ears and the accessories and the hat and the glasses, all those things. But I've got that core energy I want, but I've changed it into a slightly different character. This way, I've got my core where I start. I don't have to start from scratch. I change her slightly, and she's the one that I use to audition that script because I feel she's the best choice.
So it sounds like primary colors, essentially, and then you're sort of mixing, maybe blending, adjusting, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Creating the shading.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that I have all these women at my disposal. Now, the other thing about having those core characters is that I know each one of those women extremely well.
Well, they're all part of you.
I know what they look like. I know what they sound like. I know how they laugh. I know how they dress. All those things I have very firmly in my mind, and I know how they will deliver the words. So you see, I'm really just kind of going to the closet and saying, oh, I think Marjorie today, or I think Emily. Oh, Emily'd be good for this one. Take out those clothes, put those on, and that's who performs the script.
Reminds me a little bit of the United States of Terra, I think it is.
Yeah.
Diablo Cody, it's a multiple personalities.
There's a funny story about that because I told my husband that. I said, I've got, all these different personalities, and he says, it works for me. I get to sleep with a different woman every night.
Hello. So all right.
It can be good, yeah.
Now, that dovetails very nicely into what I was going to ask you both about demos, and I know that you talk a lot about that on your site.
Before we get into the demo side of things, though, I think it's important that we kind of give a little completion to the process that we're talking about.
Please, by all means.
Because we kind of left things hanging. Because right now, Penny's talked about creating the characters, but how do you go about doing that? So there's still a big question hanging out there.
Okay, well then let me ask you that then. So how do you go about taking all of those elements and then create the character?
I'm so glad you asked. Because that gets into the other components of those 7 elements that we've talked about. So far, we've talked about F and G. Forget who you are.
And
gamble. And by the way, the second part of forget who you are is focus. Mm-hmm. We have to be focused on being in the moment of our performance. We can't be thinking about what we're having for dinner or anything else. If we're not focused, then we are in our way as an actor. The real us is standing in the way of the compelling character and performance. So we've talked about F, and we've talked about G, and we've talked a little about C. Well, that still leaves A, B, and D.
Okay.
So let's start with A, shall we?
Sure. Let's go. Yeah. Let's start at the top of the alphabet.
Let's start at the top and work our way back down.
Very good.
Okay. A is the audience. That's understanding who we're talking to.
That's really important.
It's critical because we have to understand who we're talking to, and by understanding who we're talking to, it gives us enough information about how to start developing the interpretation of the words. Because you were asking, well, how do you interpret a script? Well, you've got to know who you're talking to. If you're talking, let's just say in your real world, you're talking to your boss, you're going to talk to your boss one way. You're going to talk to a peer a different way.
Sure.
It's not the same type of communication. It's understanding, it's knowing who that audience is. So that's critical. You've got to understand that. And that's usually, in fact, not usually, it's always going to be revealed within the text of the script. If it's a commercial, by reading through the content of the script, we have a very solid idea of who we're trying to talk to. And if we don't get a clue, then we ask the writer or the producer, say, who are you trying to reach with this? And they'll give you a demographic.
Oh, sure.
We're trying to reach women 15 to 35. Okay, that gives you some more information that you can work with. But you've got to boil it down to a specific.
So you get that person in your head, or that particular, you get sort of a rough composite of who it is that you're talking to, and then what?
Well, you have to identify that individual, because you must be talking to only one person.
That's what makes it conversational, if we've got that one person in mind. Because you can't have a conversation with 100 people at a time. You can only have a conversation with one person. So it is actually, rather than a rough sketch, it's pretty specific.
Yep.
Who you're talking to. That way, when you deliver the lines, it sounds like you're talking to somebody, and because of that, everyone who hears it feels like you're talking to them.
Here's one mistake, though, that a huge number of voice talent make, who are just getting started especially. And they figure, okay, this sounds like it's my brother-in-law. I'm going to talk to my brother-in-law. Big mistake. Because when you're talking to somebody that you know intimately well, what happens is you all of a sudden stand in the way of the performance.
Explain what you mean by that.
Well, because it's you know this person. You have a personal relationship.
A history.
You have a history. So what happens is, as an actor, that personal relationship shades your performance.
Well, it takes you, if you've created a character, right? If you've created a character that is not you, which is what you need to do, okay? If you are talking to somebody that you know, your character is you. See?
So what you're suggesting then is that you need to develop someone in your mind that you're speaking to who is a relative stranger.
Well, that you don't know.
They're specific, but you don't know them.
Well, the thing is that your audience is not a stranger to your character.
Okay.
They kind of work hand in hand. So if my character is a doctor, let's say, and my audience is a patient, I have a relationship with them for as long as I'm delivering those words.
Sure.
So if I'm thinking, okay, this is, by looking at the script, this is a doctor comforting someone, telling them where they can get services for a loved one. So when I'm talking to her, I see her. It's not somebody I know, but I see a little white-haired lady with blue eyes that are filled with tears. And I, as the doctor, am holding her hand as I tell her, this is what you can do. But it's not Penny telling her this is what you can do. It's doctor, whatever I've decided it's going to be, relaying that information.
That's a very interesting distinction, because
Yes.
I find that a lot of the people that I have worked with in the past are really trying to get different shades of you, so that you aren't necessarily taking you off and putting another character on, but you are sort of, for example, and I'll just sort of take the example that you gave. If I were going to, deliver bad news to somebody, I would think of a time that I had to deliver bad news to somebody, and if it were to be sort of a doctor-like character in tone, I would think of a more formal type relationship that I would have with somebody. Maybe I'd straighten my back up, my posture would change a little bit, but it would still be me, if you follow. So, but you're suggesting something otherwise.
Yeah, technically, it's always us. I mean, it's different aspects of us.
Right.
If I am talking to a patient as a doctor, there will be that nurturing part of Penny that is definitely there. But see, if it's Penny giving bad news to my mother, it's going to be completely different than if it is doctor giving information to a patient.
Okay.
Do you see the distinction?
I do see the distinction, sure.
Because I don't, that relationship is not there to color what it is that I have to express. So, and it's like, Stefan, whatever works for the person, I'm all in favor of. Because what will work for one is not going to work for another.
Right.
And that's why Jim said, we give you lots and lots and lots of tools, and then you decide which ones you use every day, which ones you never use, or which ones you only use occasionally.
Well, now, let's move on to B, and you'll have to remind me what B was again.
Okay, B is backstory.
Backstory,
And,
okay.
By the way, A and B and C and D and E are the 5 processes that we go through. All of those 5 processes are directly related to F and G. Forget who you are and focus, and taking that risk for the gamble. When Penny was talking about, in this discussion of who the audience is and how you're going to create a character who communicates to that audience, that's directly related to forgetting who you are. Mm-hmm. When we create the character that effectively reaches the individual that we want to communicate with, we have to step outside of ourselves many times, and that's forgetting who we are to become the reality of the character. There is another aspect of that, which, I break this down in the book, is that there are two basic types of actors. There's the character actor, which is what we've really been talking about, and there's the celebrity actor that I've just coined that term, but it's really, that's where what you were talking about is where the voice actor primarily presents their performances from their own perspective and their own personal point of view.
Their own core.
Don LaFontaine was a celebrity actor. Ernie Anderson, celebrity actor. There are people out there who basically do themselves. One of the examples that we use is in the motion picture industry and films, Tom Cruise.
He's a celebrity.
He's a celebrity actor. Everything that you see Tom Cruise in, it's Tom Cruise.
It's different shades of Tom Cruise, sure.
It's
right,
shades
it's
of
different shades.
Exactly. But how about Meryl Streep?
Much more of a chameleon, sure.
She is absolutely the personification of a character actor. Mm-hmm. Everything she does, she becomes that character. Right. And Meryl Streep's nowhere to be found. She truly has stepped aside and lets the character become true and real. Mm-hmm. Tom Cruise does shades of Tom Cruise.
And it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It's just different techniques. It's just the way that their process. It certainly works for both of them. Mm-hmm. So we're not saying one's better than the other.
It's just to be aware of both.
It's important to be aware of, which is why I brought that up.
Yeah, but let's get back to backstory.
Okay, backstory is, I've redefined it. I figure I wrote the book, I can redefine it.
Sure.
In theater and film, backstory is basically everything in the character's history that brought them to this moment in time. Well, that's a lot. And in voiceover, we don't have the time to deal with all that. We have to know what is it we are responding to. Because every line, every word that we say in a script is in response to something. We have to know what that is. If it's not clearly stated within the context of the script, we as actors get to make it up.
Right.
That's our job.
We are creatives after all.
So the backstory is what it is we are responding to. And we have to know that from the very first word that we speak. And when we speak those first few words, we have to say them in a way that is interesting and appropriate for the response that we are making. So that's basically backstory. Character we've already talked about.
Sure.
D is desires. What does our character really want and need on an internalized gut level as a result of speaking these words? We want something, or we wouldn't be talking.
Now, I want to clarify something as we proceed through this. You're speaking, I'm extrapolating here, generally about commercial copy that is often character-based. You have two characters, maybe three characters, all speaking to one another.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
No, it could be the only one.
It could be a
single voice.
It can be a monologue.
Script. I don't want to get into the actual copywriting side of things because that's a whole other conversation. But because there are a lot of scripts out there that are just very poorly written.
You can say that again.
Yeah, there are lots of scripts out there.
Yeah, I'd love nothing more than to be able to take all these really bad copywriters and put them into a room and say, okay, people, this is how you write an effective script.
Well, maybe that's going to be your next career.
Well, we constantly reinvent ourselves, so
there you go.
Maybe that's another phase. But anyhow, let's just say we're working with one of those poorly written scripts.
Yeah.
We can't rewrite it. We've been hired to deliver those words. We have to find a way of making those words as compelling and as interesting as possible. Mm-hmm. So by going through these 7 elements of understanding who we're talking to, what we are responding to, or why we're talking to them, who we are as the speaker of those words, which in most cases is not going to be us because, that's not our real life situation. We need to know what it is that we want to achieve as a result of speaking. That's the desire. Now, here's another key. We talked about one mistake that a lot of people make in terms of their performance. This is another mistake. A lot of people think that when they're delivering a commercial script, that their job is to sell the product or the message.
Oh, many people think that.
Mm-hmm. That's the common misconception.
But guess what? It's not.
No.
Your job as a voice actor is to tell the story, not to sell the product. We're looking for almost exclusively, we're looking for conversational style.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because that's the other spec that you tend to see a lot on commercial copy is storytelling. We want a storyteller. We want a natural storyteller.
Right.
It's exactly what they want.
And then they send us a script that is not a story. It's all information and statistics.
But they know what they want. They want something that's compelling. They want something that people will listen to long enough to get the message.
On a more basic level, aren't they really just looking for somebody to actually give voice to what they're hearing in their head? I found that from a lot of copywriters.
Level, yeah. Mm-hmm. But see, that's where we as the voice actor, at least Jim and myself, we look at it. We really, our desire as an actor is for it to be effective. Now, I'm going to get paid the same either way. But if I can deliver those words in a way that I know is going to be very effective, I've just done my job better.
So let's move on to E and remind me what that is.
Okay, E is energy.
Energy, okay.
And there are 3 component parts to energy. Now, every voice actor, if you're standing in front of a microphone or sitting in front of your mic and you're delivering the lines, you're exuding energy because you've got to tell the story. You're speaking these words. There's energy there. Well, that's fine and well, but unless you know what kind of energy you need to put into the performance, it's going to generally be flat.
Yeah.
And a flat performance is boring and results in tune out. So we need to understand what the energy is that we need to put into that communication, into telling the story, as it were.
Yeah, and I really want to I'd love to hear what you have to say about this because it's such a frustrating thing to thread that needle between conversational and comatose. And a lot of times, when you get into a situation where you're in with a casting director and they're just like, "Now I need you to dial it back down a little bit. Can you dial it back down a little bit?" And so finding that energy that says, "Yeah, I'm engaged. Yeah, I know what I'm talking about and I have a message to I have a story to tell." This, to me, is the real subtlety of voiceover.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And there are a couple of aspects of the energy of dialing it back. One thing that we suggest, in fact, in the classes that Penny and I teach in our workshops, years ago, I used to teach the workshops in a recording studio in the booth with headphones. Now we teach we teach our workshops in a much larger open space, and we don't use headphones. And there's a very specific reason for that. Because what happens is when you are on headphones, you're listening to your wonderful tones coming back into your ears. Mm-hmm. And the tendency is, if the headphones are even cranked up a little bit too loud, your tendency is to talk softer, which is pulling back your energy. When you're off headphones, you can often create a much more believable and real delivery of the words because you're not dealing with hearing yourself coming back into your own ears. So we eliminate that fold back of our performance, which allows us to be more real initially.
And I think we also tend to like the sound of our own voices, and that can get in the way as well. So yeah.
Now, headphones, don't misunderstand, because headphones are really important because we have to know what we sound like on mic. We have to know whether we're popping the mic. We have to know if we're picking up too much of the room.
Or mouth noise.
Or whatever it is. So, I definitely would say, rehearse the lines initially under headphones to really hear what you're doing and make sure your placement is correct on mic, and then take the headphones off when you're actually tracking.
That's one way of adjusting the energy. Are there others that
yes.
that you talk
about? There are 3 component levels to energy. The first is the psychological energy. The second is the physical energy. And the third level is emotional energy.
Okay.
Every script that we deal with, whether it's an audiobook, technical manual, on through an entertaining, upbeat, lighthearted commercial, has emotional content. Yes, even that technical manual has emotional content.
To somebody, it's pretty darn exciting.
It was interesting enough for somebody to write it, I suppose.
Yes.
So
yes.
Then you should do it the honor of actually giving it the energy it deserves.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd like to just try a little bit. This is the best way that I've found to explain what the 3 levels are for and why they're important.
Okay.
And that is, I'm just going to try this with you, Stephan. We didn't talk about this before, but laugh right now.
Just okay.
Laugh. Okay. Did it feel real to you?
Enough, sure.
Enough.
I mean, I'm having an enjoyable conversation with the two of you, so I figure a laugh feels genuine enough to issue forth.
Exactly. Okay. Now, because you had that to go on, I'm having an enjoyable conversation. Your laugh was more believable. Mm-hmm. If I asked somebody just out of the clear blue that walked in the door, laugh for me, it would sound stiff. It wouldn't sound real at all. The reason is there's no reason for you to laugh. There's nothing funny. You had no funny thought. Nothing is there. So it's more like, ha, ha, ha.
Right. So you have to have something to draw on. You have to anchor it to something.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And that's what that first level is. It's an emotion. It's a psychological thought. Something is funny. Now, if something is funny, it's going to present itself some way in your body. Either you're going to get a big smile on your face, your shoulders will go up, you start to feel it in your, and then when you have that physicalization, it automatically and very naturally goes into a real and a believable laugh.
And I find that to be the case with virtually any emotion that you're trying to put out there. If you're playing a depressed character, your shoulders are going to come down. Maybe your chin will drop a little bit. If you're playing somebody who's right, and you're playing somebody who's up and confident, your chest is going to come out, your chin's going to jut out, and it's going to sound different.
So the essence of this is without those levels of energy, first having the thought, second having it manifest it some way in your body physically, you won't get a real and believable emotion. It can't happen. So that's why the thought, the physicalization, and then the real emotion, the one you're really trying to get to, will be there.
I think Stella Adler would approve.
Yes, I think she
so,
would
yes.
too. And the thing is that's what we try to get people to understand is that you need to, if you're selling me food, for instance, if you're not selling me, if you're telling me about food, if you can taste the food, smell the food, feel the food yourself as the actor, when you would describe it to me, I will see the food, taste the food, feel the food.
Ideally, yeah.
Okay. Well, if we're good actors, that's exactly what we're doing every time we're describing or telling a story about anything. Doesn't matter.
There's a tendency to go a little too far in that direction, and I think that's oftentimes when you're asked to sort of pull that back. If you're talking about, let's say fried chicken, for example, and you're really talking about the crispiness of the skin and just the golden texture and all of that, if you oversell that sometimes, I get from certain casting directors that they want you to sort of pull that back. You still want to have the intent of what you're talking about without overselling it. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well, and you just used the key phrase there, and that is sell.
Sell.
Because you're trying to sell.
Right.
Yeah,
So
if you're selling fried chicken.
Yeah, if you're trying to sell fried chicken, the tendency is going to be I really love the taste of this. Now, you're going to take the subtext too far. Mm-hmm. You're going to put too much spin on it.
Well, and emphasis. So it would be crispy instead of crispy.
Yeah, and that's a lot of directors will say, I need you to put more emphasis. I need you to hit the client name. I need you to punch this word. Mm-hmm. Well, what they're asking for is emphasis, and what we say is take the word emphasis out of your vocabulary. Don't even
as a voice actor. Yeah.
As a voice actor, don't even think in the term of emphasis.
Think importance. Important.
Okay. Yeah.
It makes it's so different to say a word with great importance than it is to emphasize a word.
Yeah, emphasis is empty.
Huge difference.
Emphasis is empty. There's nothing to it. There's no meaningfulness to emphasis.
But importance, definitely.
Value and importance, yeah. So what we suggest is you have to approach the script from the point of view of telling the story, not of selling the product or message. When you take it out of the selling context and you're just there to talk about this and tell the story, and you understand who you're talking about, why you're talking to them, who you are that's talking to them, what you want out of it, the emotional delivery will fall into place, and it'll be far more believable and natural than if you just try to arbitrarily say, oh, I need to say this with this kind of an energy without having the other parts lined up. It's not going to sound right.
Well, see, and also, too, what I say to people is, you know what it feels like to have a normal and natural conversation with someone, right? And you do it all day long, every day. You talk to people. You know what it feels like. If it doesn't feel like a normal conversation, it doesn't sound like one either. So if you're talking about that crispy fried chicken, how would you tell a friend about crispy fried chicken? Would you say it's crispy and it's firm and it tastes so good? No, you'd say, wow, this chicken is so good. You got to try it. It's so crispy and I love it, the way the flavors smell. You talk to somebody. You don't sell them fried chicken. You tell them about fried chicken. And that way it will always sound normal.
And that's an important distinction, sure.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why I think when your directors are saying pull it back is that you may very well be in that sell mode, maybe not even realizing it, instead of in the let me tell you about.
Now, a lot of times in sessions, you'll get directors who want to give you a line reading, and some actors are very resistant to that. I don't happen to be one of them. I find it to be actually very expedient because we're born mimics. I mean, most of us are. If you get into this line of business, you're born mimics. So how do you advise your students to deal with the dreaded line reading?
Well, we'll do line reads. We'll give our students line reads. If I'm when I'm on my director's hat, if I'm working with somebody and I'm not able to get them to where I want them to be, I'm going to give them a line read. And then there have been cases when I've said, okay, here's what I want you to do. Listen to exactly how I inflect this, how I say this, and I want you to mimic it back exactly the way that I do it.
But that's when you're teaching.
But I've done that in sessions too. So when that happens, I'm really using the line read as a directorial tool to get the talent to where I want them to be. Most of the time, Penny and I, our normal directing process is that we want the actor to bring the performance to the table. That's why we hired them. That's why they're there.
Yeah.
So we don't want them to be a mimic of us. Otherwise, we'd be doing the spot.
But going back to your question, though, is if you are in a session and somebody wants to give you a line read, what should you do? Let them give you a line read.
Absolutely.
I mean, you are there as the talent. That's true. But the one thing that you always want to remember as a professional is who is signing your check. And if they are signing your check, you do what they tell you to do. Yep. Even because, there's been times I've been in sessions and I think, oh, this is totally the wrong read. I know it, in every cell of my body. But if that's what they want me to do, that's what I do because they are signing my check.
Yeah, and there's a certain level of tact that goes into this process. If I'm working with a director and they're giving me a line read on something, first couple of times when I do that back, I'm going to take what they give me and then I'm going to grasp that understanding as much as possible and then give them back my version of that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that works, and usually it works pretty well, but I've worked with directors where it doesn't work. And really what they're asking for is they don't want my spin on something. What they are wanting is exactly what they're giving me.
Yeah.
And if I go through 2 or 3 alternate versions where I'm giving them back my interpretation of what their line read is, and it's not, they're still saying, no, I need it this way. Well, okay, I'll concede and I will do it exactly the way that they're asking for. But what the funny thing is, sometimes when you give them exactly what they're asking for, they're still not happy.
Right.
And they still want to push you, and they still want to get something different.
Tell them the Burgundy story.
Oh, God. Yeah, well, no, this is actually, we did a workshop in Chicago a few years ago, and Harlan Hogan was one of our guest panelists. And he was telling us the story of one of his experiences where he was in a session and he delivered a line and the director on the other said, well, that was really nice. That was a little bit rosé, but what I'd like is a little more burgundy. and Harlan said, he looked at the director and said, okay. Mm-hmm. And then he delivered the line exactly the way he had just delivered it. And the director said, oh, perfect. That's exactly what I want.
Much more burgundy.
Yeah. So, I mean,
sometimes they really don't know what they want.
They don't know what they want, and oftentimes it's our job to sort of help them find it. And we will have the second half of the James Alburger, Penny Abshire interview for you next week. That Voiceover Podcast is a co-production of Half Full and Get Creative Inc. For more information, go to thatvoiceoverpodcast.com or check us out on iTunes. Thanks for listening. I'm Stephen Cox.